start to go, that message didn't land with 20 people, but this message did land. So let's put more emphasis here versus there. And so that is kind of my formula for raising big checks.
I'm going to have Adam talk about the importance of the pitch deck from a VC perspective.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I'm super excited for this, I should just say, because it's rare that we actually get to go through slide by slide on an awesome pitch deck that raised, one of the best Series A's in Colorado recently. So this is going to be awesome. From my perspective as an investor, and Natty can echo this too, we see hundreds, if not thousands, of pitch decks every year, right? And we get lots of inbound stuff, and we have to go through them really quickly. So when you're setting a pitch deck, it's really a first impression, and assume that a VC is going to go through it and kind of click through it initially in like 2, 3, 4 minutes. So take that lens, first of all, and that means a couple things. One, it's all about storytelling, as Liz was alluding to, right? I got to click through each slide, and almost the headlines themselves should tell me a story. One of the things I like to do, and I learned early in my career, was in building a slide deck, take a bunch of blank pages, write the headlines to the slide, and that should tell you the story, and then you go fill it in, right? Because that's what a VC is going to go click through and see. Similarly, if you're not a great designer yourself or have one on your team, spend a little bit of money and get it to look professional, right? Because again, it's a sales pitch, it's a first impression. That stuff matters. And furthermore, you want to be simple, right? So I look at every slide once you've filled in the slide, say, is there extra stuff on this slide that I can take off, right? And I know you are deep in the weeds in your business and you want to caveat everything and you want to, this, that, and the other thing. No, this is a pitch deck. This is at like high level to VC. The whole point is getting someone like Natty and I to say, look at this deck. Wow, this is interesting enough where I want to take a meeting, and then we can go a lot deeper. Okay, so those are the things to do. I wanted to say just a couple things. I wrote a blog post on this earlier this year of a couple things not to do that we see in decks that immediately are kind of like red flags. One is kind of my favorite, which is really misqualifying the competition. So either putting a big, successful, profitable incumbent is just writing them off as dumb. I've seen this in decks. Or showing yourself, here's our competition, and all the competition are big, failed companies, right? So I'm like, how are you going to be a successful company when the ones you're comparing yourself to, I immediately see Casper Mattress, just to pick on them from L, before I'm like, how is this going to be a big company? And then the other thing just to note, because people always want to, again, make themselves look good and impress investors, don't want to go too far, right? You want to show your credentials, you want to show who you are and who your team is, but you don't want to wildly exaggerate your bio. Don't proclaim yourself as a visionary within the deck. I know that sounds ridiculous. I think I've seen that 3 or 4 times. I don't know if you've Natty.
Well, the one that I commonly see is someone puts that they went to Harvard, but they actually did like a 1-day online course through Harvard. Like that doesn't totally count. Or they worked at Google, but they did like a 1-week design sprint training with Google, but don't say that that's what they did there. So, that's an instant disqualifier. So, and it's fine, just like own your background. Most investors are now not looking for those just generic qualifications that used to matter in the past. They want to know, why are you the team to build this business? It doesn't matter if you worked at Google or went to Stanford or not.
Exactly. So
I went to state school, so.
Me too.
Me too. So to sum it up, make sure that your story gives investors a reason to say yes, but don't do things that are going to immediately stand out as a reason to say no, right? Your goal is just to get that enough interest to get that meeting where you can go deeper.
All right, we're going to jump into the deck here. If you're in the back, you might want to crowd forward. There are a few empty seats here because we are going to show them on these screens. We're going to be looking at this screen so we can kind of see it as well. So apologies that there's not a better way to have you in the back see this, but move forward, feel free to crowd in. And we're going to roll here. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have Liz kind of talk through each slide. She's not going to pitch the slide like she would in a pitch meeting, but she's going to talk about what the point of the slide is, maybe some of the key takeaways. And then Adam and I will riff from a venture side, what stood out, why that slide was important, maybe even what could have been better about it. So.
Oh, and before we start, I never pitched to this deck. So just to be really blatant about it, the deck will go to an investor before I meet with them. Looking forward to meeting with you. Here's everything to know about my business, about me. When I get to the meeting, I have a pitch that I give from memory. So I talk about the company, but we don't look at the slides. And what I'm emphasizing is certain things that they may have red in the slides, or I'm highlighting things that I believe are really important about the business that they may have glossed over in the slides. And then that's about 15 minutes of the meeting. Then I have a live demo that I do in my pitch. And this is like actually something that I think helps my company stand out, is that I am not afraid to literally show you my product right now. Whatever's happening, doesn't matter, bruises and all. And so I do a live demo of a real photo shoot in the moment for about 5 minutes, and then I save 10 minutes at the end. And that 10 minutes at the end, I say, all right, so based on the deck, based on what we've talked about today, what stands out to you as a place you'd like to spend more time on together today? And so that's what this information hopefully is leading up to this moment where I've piqued their curiosity somewhere and get them excited about continuing to chat.
Let's jump in. So, where do I point this clicker thing? Is it on? I think so. Maybe if you're in the back, can you go to the next slide, please?
That's the front
Awesome.
page, everyone.
Liz, what was the goal with this slide? This is the first slide. Oh, actually, another thing I wanted to point out. I think your deck is about 15 slides, 12 to 15 maybe?
Yeah, I think it's 16, yeah.
We may not go through all the slides because, as you'll see, the first few slides are the most important, so we may not cover everything, but
yeah.
We'll start rolling.
So this is just my most important thing with this front slide is what's the name of our company and what do we do? So as you'll see here, there's a couple key things. These are real images taken on the Suna platform. There's a photo camera, there's a video camera, and there's a little cart graphic on all those pictures, like you're adding it to cart. Honestly, my goal is always to say, this should be the most beautiful first slide they've ever seen, and that's usually the direction I give my co-founder.
I think from a VC perspective, cool, I know what company I'm looking at. I'm on to the next slide in 1 second.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's beautiful, but we're moving on.
I'm not expecting you to invest based on that slide.
Okay, Liz, tell us
Yeah,
about
so this is
one.
a bio slide. So we lead with a bio slide at Suna for the very reason, actually, that Natty talked about. We are not conventional startup founders. Haley and I are from a production background. So I worked in television. Haley was a professional animator by trade. And the seed we want to plant is this idea that we're creative technologists. One of the biggest misconceptions about people who do creative work for a living is that we are not technical. But actually, if you've worked in this field at all, you understand that animation is a highly physics and mathematics-based profession. For someone like myself who worked in post-production, there is a lot of work around file routing, computer systems, networking that is really important to what I did for a living. And so we just want to plant the seed that we are, one, technical people, but that we're also creative people. We want to share our mission, and we want to share some credentials. So some of the credentials you'll see here are the companies that we've worked for, the companies that our leadership team has worked for. And then if you really dig into the details, you'll see that Haley was a Forbes 30 under 30. You'll see that I have an Emmy Award. I always know how excited someone is if they start the meeting asking if they want to see my Emmy. And then I always say, well, if you write me a big fat check, I'll let you hold my Emmy.
Adam, what stood out for you on this slide?
Yeah, I think
How would you take away?
Yeah, this is great. I mean, I love that Liz leads with the team here. Again, you don't have to do that, I think, but making sure that the team is early in the deck, because at an early stage, particularly where Natty and I invest at pre-seed or seed, team is most important, right? So being front and center and telling us who you are, I think is great. And also having a big vision and being very clear what that big vision is early is important here as well.
We'll go to the next slide. Liz, tell us about this slide. What was the point of this one?
Yeah, so this slide is our total addressable market slide. So if anybody's ever heard of the concept of TAM, and total addressable market is basically if your company was to continue to scale into, the next 15, 20 years, how big could this business really get? And we really landed on this idea that Suna was the content creation engine for commerce. That's what we still are. At the time that I raised this round, there were 7 million retailers online. Just so you understand how that's evolved since our Series B, my Series B deck, we increased that number to 21 million retailers online, because that's how much e-commerce had grown between just those two. We did, what's the average SKUs? So average SKUs is essentially how many products does one of these retailers hold, how many photos do they need per product, and what do we charge? It creates a very simple math equation. 7 million times 500 products times 5 pictures per at $39 a photo on the Suna platform gets you a TAM of $683 billion. It also just helps people realize how big the opportunity is. Like, if you were not thinking that photos were a big opportunity, all of a sudden, hopefully, our simple math has made it really easy for you to understand it is a big opportunity.
Maybe I'll jump in on this one to start. So when I remember when we were working on this slide, we had to introduce the business somehow, and we were thinking, what is a way to get someone's attention early on in the deck? I think when you see like creative technologists, that's interesting. When you see the front slide, like I think you're intrigued as an investor, but we really want to put something in there that made you really pay attention and make sure you flip the rest of the deck. And looking at a TAM that big is obviously exciting to an investor. And I also didn't want to discount how well you described the business here, saying every transaction online has one thing in common: visuals. So all of a sudden you just make us feel as investors like this is a ubiquitous product that could be used all over the internet. That gets us excited as investors because the market size is big. I will say one criticism of this slide is sometimes a TAM that big is a little off-putting because it seems unrealistic and this entrepreneur isn't really grounded. But when you look at the math, it actually makes sense. So sometimes people will put a TAM, which is like all e-commerce is $1 trillion. But that doesn't really tell me anything about your business and what is your opportunity in that market. Liz did a very simple bottoms-up approach here, and even though it is kind of a ridiculously big number, and normally that would be a turnoff, it's very credible because it's a bottoms-up, and it's enlightening me to a new market that I had never thought of and has never existed before, aggregated in one business. So I would steer you away from showing a TAM that big unless you have such an elegant way of building it up, bottoms-up, like Liz did.
I 100% agree with Natty, and just think we're doubling down because I think this is so compelling how Liz actually builds up the TAM. And to Natty's point, how often we see TAM that it's like, hey, $1 trillion e-commerce because entrepreneurs are told you got to show a big TAM, but that's completely meaningless when you're only attacking this little sliver of the market. I want to know how big of a space are you actually attacking?
Show your work. That's the easy answer.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. So I think from our investor perspective at this point, I think we're pretty intrigued. Like if I'm putting myself in my investor hat, which I'm literally wearing my investor hat, we're intrigued. We're going to click through to the next slide. And to Adam's point earlier, investors are busy, and so they're kind of looking for easy reasons to not continue looking through the deck, but very intrigued at this point. Okay, Liz, talk us through this one. Slide 3.
This is probably the single most important slide in my deck in terms of getting meetings, because it does a lot of things that totally disrupt people's expectations. The first is every single investor is using this framework of what is in an e-commerce store's technology stack. They think about this with every business. What's in every business's technology stack? What are the tools that they are using? What is the software they're subscribed to? What are the things that are essential to run their business and make money? We essentially visualize here the e-commerce technology stack. So if you have an e-commerce store, it is almost impossible to not have a website provider. It is impossible to not have a payments provider. It is impossible not to have a communications provider. It's impossible not to have so these are the essential things you need. We've just planted the seed of, well, actually, visuals are also part of every single transaction. So logically, there's a missing part of the technology stack for these e-commerce stores, which is the visual layer of the e-commerce stack. We then show how our TAM isn't all that crazy when compared to the TAMs of some of these other businesses. So, you get kind of a sense of, actually, if this becomes like a Shopify, could it be as big as this? This slide, I think, is probably the one that I remember sitting in the meeting and kind of pitching our existing investors on, like, let's just be bold and put ourselves in the technology stack. And everybody's eyes opened up and said, yes, let's do it. And to this day, I still use this. This was in my Series B deck. It will probably be in my Series C deck. This slide will probably be in every deck I do for the rest of my fundraising life.
Yeah, I agree. This is my favorite slide in the deck as well. I think Liz, I remember back when we were working on this deck, I think one of the things, if you do have some existing investors or advisors where you can leverage them, is each of us are always out pitching the businesses in our portfolio. We have people ask, hey, what's an investment you're excited about? Hey, I heard you invested in Suna. Tell me about that. So we all have experience of knowing, like, before Liz is actually going out to fundraise, what resonates, what doesn't resonate with people when we pitch the business. And I remember this is one we talked a lot about, of like, hey, when we actually are talking organically about Suna, this is a concept that people seem to really like, their eyes light up. So I think this is great.
I think like a sneaky trick in this slide is that all of a sudden Suna is elevated to the same level as Shopify, Stripe, SendGrid, Salesforce, and subliminally as an investor, that's very powerful because Liz isn't comparing herself to small companies. She's comparing herself to the biggest brands in the world in the e-commerce stack. And as an investor, that's very seductive.
You don't want to
And
miss
it's even
out.
subliminal. It's like direct, but it's also subliminal. And before you know it, like you just can see the investor wheels start dreaming and say, oh, this could be the investment of my career.
Also, subliminally, we all start with S, which just plants a seed that I'm a fucking genius. And I like that too.
Anything else on this one?
I don't know how I top I'm a fucking genius. Let's move on.
Okay. All right, next slide. All right, Liz, talk about this one.
Honestly, I think you guys should start with it because this is one of those slides where it's like this can become soup, but there's a reason why this slide I think works. Why don't you say why you think this slide works, and then I'll talk about it.
Yeah, so the goal of this slide is to show that this isn't just a dream. This is actually real, and it's growing well. And so this is tailored a little bit more as a Series A deck. If you're a pre-seed company, you probably don't have a ton of traction. If you're a seed company, you're just starting it. And so this might be a little ahead of some of the entrepreneurs in the room, but what you want to take away here is this is real. So investors get pitched a lot of stuff that isn't real, but when you see something that has the promise that Liz alluded to in the early slides, and then you say it's real, it's very appealing. We redacted some of the numbers on here, but it's just shows like people like this product a lot. The other thing that this does really good job of is making the investor know that Liz knows her numbers really well. Like these are custom numbers to her business. They aren't generic metrics. And what we see on here is also we can assume what Liz cares about. So there's revenue, there's bookings, which is a leading indicator of revenue, and then there's acquisition and customer satisfaction. Those are the things that make the most sense to track for her business. And so we immediately know Liz understands her business super well, and wow, it's doing great.
The one thing I would add to that too, again, to Natty's point, if you're pre-seed, you probably don't have this, but if you're at a stage of business where you do have some traction, showing it early is really important, right? One of the things we look for is if you bury your traction slide like deep in the back of the deck, I know it's because you're trying to hide it, because it's not very good. So bring it up front.
Thank you. This is exactly right. So for me, what this communicates is three things. One, I'm not completely delusional. We are growing. We're growing very rapidly. Two, we're growing because the product is actually beloved. So when you think about kind of the order of operation, we're growing, we have a ton of money. That money isn't just coming exclusively from net new customers that join the platform, use the platform, and are repeating at a high rate with a high customer satisfaction rating, which allows us to have more product-led growth versus strictly marketing-led growth, which we'll talk about later in this deck. And then the acquisition channels, believe it or not, that little stack is a really important stack, I think, at Series A, because especially now in this market, you are going to have to be able to prove that your product isn't just sort of wishy-washy in terms of customer acquisition. Your product actually is wanted, needed, more essential than ever in order to get those acquisitions. People aren't sort of just spending money willy-nilly right now. And so being able to say that our organic growth was significantly larger portion of our acquisition over the previous timeline than our paid growth was a really important metric, I think, at that point in the business.
Let's spend a few minutes, since this slide, many startups in here, my hunch, don't have quite the traction that you had at that time. So maybe for each of you, how would you suggest a pre-seed company show traction? Or what should they put on their traction slide? And same for a seed company. Like what, even if you don't have these kind of numbers, how can you make your progress stand out?
Start with you for what you actually did
Yeah,
on your
so
decks, yeah.
early stage, before we had even launched the product, we were really focused on how many email subscribers did we have and how many people did we have on our wait list. So we were building a wait list before we launched the first beta of our product. And by the time I had raised our pre-seed, I think we had about 2,500 customers on the wait list. And a really important metric for me at the pre-seed was that 2,500 people on the wait list. Then when I raised my seed, how many people from the wait list converted, which was about 15%, which we thought was strong. So that kind of narrative of how many people are interested in the thing you are saying the world needs and how did that grow over time, and then also where did they come from. If you are exclusively building a wait list on Facebook and Instagram ads, I regret to inform you that that's probably not the greatest strategy. Paid wait list to me is not the same thing as building a wait list through actual customer conversations. And then I think another thing I try to advise startups on is, actually thinking about what are some of the market forces that you can show contribute to this traction, right? So a really great example that I saw with a company recently is, there was a law changed about how we do at-home testing for COVID that now is relevant to other types of at-home testing. And it opens up these 25 other industries, and they just happen to be scientists who worked in 15 of those 25 industries, right? Like, that's a form of talking about traction too. You have a head start. You in some way, shape, or form are in front of the competition, whoever that might be.
Yeah, and don't be afraid also to highlight things that you've built, even if they're not launched yet, especially if you're a pre-seed company. Investors want to see that you're making progress, and so traction is another proxy for progress. So what have you done? What have you built? What have you accomplished, even if that isn't yet translated to revenue or customers, is helpful. Okay, next slide. Liz, tell us about this one.
So this was a really important slide in terms of, this is kind of our version of a competition slide, because keep in mind, one of the things that's really complex about my business is that now we have a ton of people who literally just try to copy and paste my business, and it's like my new favorite thing. But at the time, no one was really doing what we were doing in terms of delivering a software solution where you could plan a photo shoot, have a photo shoot, and get an asset entirely delivered online. And so the competition was existing industries that created photos. And if you thought about, well, what are the existing industries? I could hire an e-commerce agency, I could hire a creative agency, so we had to highlight that. You could try to do it yourself, so you could go buy a white, backdrop on Amazon and buy some light boxes on Amazon and try to do it yourself. Or you could use your phone and some of the apps that existed. So kind of helping people understand that, yes, there is a way to do this today. It's not like nobody's taking pictures, but that the way that people are doing it today is also just not as seamless or as technology enabled. So one of my favorite things about this slide is just saying it's incredibly hard to do this, and let me show you how hard it is based on the options that exist today.
Yeah, I think the thing to add here too is that this shows that Liz really has an understanding of the space she's operating in, like a very comprehensive understanding, which I think is super important. And where do you sit in that whole universe?
Yeah, I'd add on here, one of the unique things about this deck is it doesn't have a typical problem slide, which most decks do. So what Liz did instead of that is she showed an opportunity with that early slide that walked through how many e-commerce businesses there are, how many photos per SKUs per business, how many photos they need per SKU, and what that would cost. So she didn't start with a problem, she started with an opportunity. But you still have to go back and talk about what is existing in the market and what is the change. And so this slide I think was really important since there wasn't a typical problem slide, because this kind of also sits in for that, which shows like here are the ways that people are tackling this opportunity today and why each of those are bad. Next.
And we also wanted to contextualize, okay, so this is such an interesting thing about like just the evolution of a business, because I would get feedback, and this is what I mean about, this is actually a slide that I added after I think my first 20 meetings, when I realized that people were super confused where Suna sat amongst those three options. So I was, doing this deck, and then everyone would be like, well, okay, but why is Suna better than doing it myself? Or why is Suna better than using my phone? And so this is actually something we added retroactively to actually show people in a matrix of affordability and expensiveness, and in a matrix of difficulty, where does Suna sit in these quadrants versus these things that people are already doing, and how can we sort of give it a letter grade so that you can understand we are literally the only option that is affordable and fast. That is the only one that exists. And so that slide was added to really help contextualize it. I have, honestly, this is probably a slide I don't need as much anymore, because increasingly, like I said, we have companies that are trying to sort of copy and paste what we're doing. But at the time, I think it just helped people get past that hurdle of where does Suna sit in this equation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Probably almost 98% of decks Natty and I see have a the obligatory 2x2 with your company in the upper right-hand quadrant, right? And just make up whatever parameters you want. So I kind of tend to gloss over those mostly. I think it's actually where it is useful, per Liz's experience, is when you're really the first in a new category. Right? I don't think it's as useful when there's a bunch of competitors and you're just like, well, we're the fastest and we have the coolest name, or whatever axes you want to come up with.
Like your arbitrary axes. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, one other takeaway, I'm looking at these on the screen here too. Maybe this is some of the few improvements for this deck, but it's hard to see on these screens, the axes. So that's something when you're thinking about your deck too, is how will it look on different screens
one of the
and different
things
monitors.
my co-founder and I have fights about all the time is font size, because I can't read anything and she loves tiny fonts, and she designs everything for our decks. And so font size is a real point of contention. I also want to add something that Haley and I do to just make this process more fun for us always is when we're doing something that we're like, God, this is so silly. Why do we have to add this stupid slide? We'll think of a joke. So this slide, the top left quadrant is your nephew, Chad. And Chad is both slow and terrible at the job of creating photos. And it's kind of a funny joke of everybody's called someone's random nephew to take a picture. If the joke doesn't land with you, it doesn't matter. It just makes me feel good that I did something that I like in my slide deck.
Great, we'll go to the next slide here. Okay.
This slide is insane. I'm not going to lie to you. Every single time I look at this slide, I'm like, a bunch of creative weirdos made this slide. So what this slide does is it attempts to head on say, there are lots of ways to create photos that are service-based businesses. This is not a service-based business. This is a technology platform. It is so easy for your business to accidentally get pigeonholed, and I think female founders have to be really careful of this, especially as, oh, I just saw photography and now I think it's a service-based business, or I just saw, the DIY option and now I think it's a service-based business. And this slide attempts to say, no, we're creating a virtual creative platform, and look at all this technology that we've built that is in an app, that's in a browser, that has this chat experience, and really walks you through step by step every single piece of technology. So it's a booking, it's a creation of a photo shoot, it's the virtual photo shoot itself, it's the ability to purchase those assets a la carte, and then it's the ability to continue to use those assets wherever you want to spread them online. So this is our attempt at saying, before you even let the idea get in your head that this is a service-based company, no, we are a technology tool.
I have two quick comments. So one, I don't know if anybody noticed, you probably could have ended the deck 2 slides ago, and you've got 95% of the story, right? Enough to get interested. So I think that's super effective. On this slide in particular, so I give startups a piece of advice, which I think is important and kind of a little bit unconventional, which is that VCs are going to have objections to your business. You know it, right? You probably have a good sense of which 1 or 2 objections are your biggest weaknesses. So take those head on. Right? And Liz knew one of those was going to be, hey, you're just a service business. You have people taking photos. You're not really a technology business. This is her way of addressing it. I think you could actually even gone further. You could have even said explicitly, we're not a service business, right? I think that is very effective for me as an investor to see, because it shows an understanding of the founder of hey, we're not perfect, and we know exactly what challenges we need to overcome.
Right, because sometimes investors will just think those things in their head and not take the meeting because they sort of pigeonhole you as a service business without taking the time, because unfortunately investors have limited time to meet startups, and so they're always sort of trying to filter, what really is interesting to me, what fits my business model. So if you can address the potential concerns earlier, you get ahead of that. And I think the two big concerns around Liz's business is this one, which is, are you service or are you technology, at least from a venture capital perspective. And the second was what you really addressed well with that TAM analysis, which is this really a big opportunity? Like, how big of an opportunity is being the ubiquitous provider for photos and video online, which, I mean, I guess now to me seems obviously big and an obvious opportunity, but at the time wasn't. So, she brought that up really early. I can't remember what slide we're on, maybe 6 or 7, but, that was very intentional to bring this up earlier.
And if you don't know, if you're really pre-seed or early and you don't know what those main objections are going to be, try to get a few friendly investors or advisors to tell you honestly, if you were an investor here, what are the 2 things that you would have major concerns with, and make sure you know that going in.
I would also say this is the start of transitioning from opportunity problem to the solution that Liz and team have built. And so that's what basically, the rest of the deck is here, is really understanding what the solution is and getting the investors excited around the product that she's built.
And then we just hammer it one more time. So it was really important to me that I said we have software and that we have 3 pieces of software. So in order for our investors to really understand where is the software. So it's one thing to say we're a tech company. Cool, we've said that now. How? We're a software company. And so, one thing you'll probably notice about my style is I'm very conversational. It comes across in probably every part of our business is that Suna is a very conversational business. I'm a very conversational person. I see no value in taking myself too seriously. And so by saying things like our magic is our software, that literally is just how I talk. I could just have put like a title here that was like, and we build software, right? Like that totally could have just been a fine title and probably is what 90% of companies would do. One thing I would just encourage you to do is this deck is an expression of who you are as a leader and the kind of company you are trying to build. And part of this investor founder meeting, getting to know each other process is also a little bit them buying into you're the right person to do this, that you are distinctive, that you are different, that you have that special something that is sometimes hard to tangibly understand. I think one of the things that I take a great deal of pride in is, these 2 will introduce me to dozens of investors. Most of them will say no, but I'm hoping that at least 90% of them will call and say, thank you for introducing me to Liz. It was a great meeting. It was a great conversation. It was a fun conversation. And I want that to be in every part of this transaction, including in the deck itself. So that the reason I call this out is I just want to encourage you to really think about how to get that founder magic into your materials all the way through. And then, what does this show? We have a self-service software that allows us to do asset routing and management. We have this thing called Camera to Cloud that runs our virtual photo shoots, and we have a digital asset management tool, right? And so these are the 3 pieces of the product where we essentially have built technology.
I think this is such a killer slide. Like I haven't looked at it in a while, and I'm realizing how powerful it is. And I'll say a few things from the investor side. First of all, I think Adam mentioned this earlier. Investors usually are reading the headlines on the slides. So this is much better than a slide title that says solution, right? Or problem on those prior ones. Like you're telling me, like, what am I gonna get on this slide? And it's sort of an exciting title. Our magic is our software. I'm super excited to read the rest of that slide because I wanna see what the magic is, right? And then you focus on 3 things here. Self-service software is highlighted, our camera to cloud software, and digital asset management tool. First of all, self-service software, bing, 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 like every entrepreneur or every investor is super excited about something that can effectively scale with no cost is what self-service software means. And so I'm gonna definitely pay attention to that. 2, camera to cloud software. Ooh, IP, something novel. I've never heard that before. I'm really curious to hear what that is and what that enables. And then digital asset management tool. I know there's already a big market in that, and I'm like, wow, you're doing all these other things, and you can become a digital asset management tool. This is very interesting, and so this is just a great slide. I don't know, you've probably seen there's a lot of motion graphics on here. That obviously, if you're a
We're
creative
crazy
company, like
about
you have
the
to do
beautiful
that.
things.
You-
You don't
yeah.
have to do this.
You all don't have to do that, but you know, it's very like if Liz and this company, which is so defined by the creative process and bringing creativity and beauty online, if her deck didn't show that, there'd be this huge disconnect. So, you know, this is probably more beautiful than you need to make a deck, but you know, it's very authentic and connected to the business.
Okay, so this is a really important deck or slide too, because it just basically says like, does this technology create a particular outcome? And so you'll have, what does the bottom left say, Nadia? I can't read that.
Percent of bookings from repeat customers.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. So, okay, this slide was, I was raising this round essentially 9 months after COVID. And COVID was this really catalyzing force in our business because all of a sudden, all those things that we just talked about, people using agencies, people hiring their nephew Chad, people doing it, trying to do it themselves, they couldn't do that anymore in COVID. And we saw a massive uptick in customer acquisition because we were the only virtual option for a photo shoot that existed anywhere. So what this slide attempts to show is, look, we've gained incredible traction since COVID, and it's been possible to go this fast because of software, because of tools, right? That the tech is actually what allowed us to go this fast. And if you were a service-based company, you could never go this fast. So the tech is what does this. The other thing that I think this really emphasizes is like, and by the way, because one of the hardest things is now I've planted the seed of software, but we are not a subscription business. We are a transactional business. And so I need to be able to communicate very clearly, while I do not have recurring revenue, there is high reoccurrence to my revenue, meaning people don't just try it and forget it. So can I prove that there's reoccurrence to this growth? And this combination of these two charts is what really communicates that to me.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, investors are very obsessed with recurring revenue. So if you don't have recurring revenue, reoccurrence is really important to understand.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is so important about, I don't care if you are pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, like I don't care where you are in your journey as a founder, you need to somewhere explain that you know your customer, and you know your customer better than anybody, and you understand what a customer is worth to you. And this is our customer slide. So what we have here is an example of a customer. This customer has an average of 4 photo shoots a year. And what does that 4 photo shoots a year create for us in terms of margin, and what does it create for us in terms of value? And then they can do just a quick calculation there. At the top right is our CAC. So they can just do a quick LTV to CAC calculation based on this customer. The pie chart on the left shows how did that money get spent? What are they using on our platform? Because keep in mind, one of the things that is really unique about our product is that there's actually 3 places where you can have a transaction. So you can have a transaction on the self-service software, you can have a transaction during your photo shoot itself, and then you can continue to buy content from our digital asset management tools forever into infinity. And so the fact that we have those 3 different places where they can buy something from us is something we need to communicate very clearly. This slide now in my Series B actually shows 3 different types of customers. So this is sort of like our average customer, but then we also have our first-time customer, and then we have our VIP customer, and we show exactly how does the margin play out, how does their value play out, what is their CAC on an individual level. So this will just continue to get more sophisticated as your business grows. And I think, yeah, this is, and to an earlier point about just knowing your numbers, one of the most important things you need to do, and you get to Series A, Series B, is you better make damn sure that every spreadsheet you have of customer data adds up to that. That if they wanted to go do a cohort analyses on the 50% that you're describing, that the math looks damn close to that. And so part of the diligence of building a slide like this is just making sure that whatever data you have about your customers and whatever data you're going to give to an investor to do their diligence matches what's on these slides.
And a reminder, this is a Series A deck. So this is, I don't know how many companies here are ready for Series A in the room, but, taking a step backwards towards pre-seed and seed, you still, even though you may not know your cost to acquire, your lifetime value, who your exact customers are, tell the investors who you're targeting and why they should buy. What's the buying moment for them? How much are they spending on similar tools? Like that depth of understanding is really helpful in educating the investor on why your customer would like your product and what's interesting about them as a customer cohort or customer set. So you can do a lot of the work of a slide like this, even if you don't have these numbers. But as you grow, this is sort of the standard as you get to Series A of the level of depth that you're going to need to know about your business. And I remember in the process, like basically what ends up happening after this deck is it results in a meeting. And after the meeting, if they're excited, it's like, I want a ton of analysis. I want to see all the data, especially at Series A and Series B. So to Liz's point, I remember you had to pull all of this data to send to investors because they want to verify, not that they don't trust you, but they just want to look at the data themselves. And so you do really have to make sure you have all the backup for this.
Yeah, and I think to Liz's point, you've got to make sure that you're presenting, it seems obvious, accurate numbers. I know there's a temptation in, hey, this is a sales deck. I want to represent things in the most positive possible light. And that's true to a point, knowing that investors are going to ask that next step. And that's like number one easy reason to say no is if you get the data and it just doesn't match up.
So
in fact, in my Series B, I'll tell a funny story. In my Series B, I'll make fun of Scott because he's great. My Series B investors are Bain Capital Ventures, and the round was led by a wonderful partner there named Scott Friend. And Scott saw my deck, and we had lots of conversations, and he was like, to be honest with you, I thought I was going to give my analysts this CSV file, and they were going to come back to me and say, these repeat numbers are bullshit. He's like, they were just too high. He's like, it was the single highest number I had ever seen from a transactional e-com business ever. He's like, I couldn't even contextualize it. And he's like, and I decided to make the investment the day Deweet put the numbers on my desk and said, it's actually 2 points higher.
It's great.
Like, just know your numbers make sense. Just know it.
So we have 5 to 7 minutes left. So I'm just going to click the slides here and maybe we'll see if there's anything we want to point out versus going through them. So we go customer slide. Next was, I guess deep diving on that repeat rate and really understanding
and margin. So one of the things that I really care about as a founder, I was a bootstrap founder for 7 years before I did this business. And so margin is important to me. Understanding margin, understanding our unit economics was important to me. And so this is just a really quick calculation on what's our margin on each product and how does that grow over time with repeat customer transactions.
For an earlier stage company, what might show up on this instead is your financial projections, which I think we have later in the deck. But if you don't know, you could put in what you think the unit economics and margins for your business might be. And frankly, if you're pre-seed and you don't know, it's okay to not have it.
I'm just doubling down on the multiple revenue streams and the price here. I would say one of the only things I'd call out here is this is how we show our future product offerings. So we've got today's things that we get paid for, and then we say future menu of things we're going to get paid for. And it just gives investors an opportunity to sort of see we're not done. There's more things that we're going to sell to these customers.
Yeah, and this is typically business model slide. Investors are going to want to know what's the business model, how much are you going to charge for it if you know. So
I don't know. This is one of those slides that you need to have, and I every single time look at it and go, yeah, that was a great time. Have you seen Facebook recently? I wish I had these numbers today. This is just a ROAS slide. So basically when we spend money...
Return on ad spend.
Yeah, return on ad spend. If we spend money to acquire a customer, how much money do we get from it over time with this giant spike during COVID when everything was haywire? And then look how great it was for the rest of time. This was not in my Series B deck. In our Series B deck, we actually focused much more heavily on how organic acquisition plays into our long-term strategy for customer acquisition.
I don't know that there's much to take away for a pre-seed or a seed company at this. I think, companies want to know that you're capital efficient, but maybe this is some of your budgeting and, where you're going to spend your capital.
This is something that I think is just a superpower of our business, and I always encourage people to, so as a general rule, I'm pretty obsessed with our customers. I am the founder that will just pop in on a photo shoot and say hi. Hi, co-founder CEO here. How's it going today? And I am also the founder who watches Twitter all day and watches Instagram all day and responds to people who are having good experiences and bad experiences. That's my style. I like that. But I also think that if that is part of your style, if you are a founder that really values customer feedback, if you have a high preference for customer information, having a place where you can sort of highlight how much people love your product is important. So these are 3 different reviews. One is from Google, one is from our Shopify app store, and another I think might be from an API store. So it just gives you a sense, or no, one's a tweet. It just gives you a sense of like, we really care about what our customers care about.
And if you're earlier pre-seed and you don't have a lot of actual financial traction yet, customer testimonials is something you can move up further in the deck.
It is really helpful as an investor to hear how do the customers explain the value in their words. So if you can get a quote of, hey, this is why this is useful for us or helpful, I think it's really helpful in a deck, especially if you're early.
This is just like a slide that I created to help people understand potential businesses that could try to enter this space. So I think Adam started by saying one of the things he hates is like when founders sort of delegitimize an existing incumbent. The point of this slide isn't to say like, Shutterstock isn't competing with me right now, the Hub isn't competing with me right now on this, but if they wanted to get into it, how hard would it be for them to enter the space? That's what this slide attempts to communicate. Instead of just calling them dumb. Shutterstock is dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I see that a lot where in this context, again, it's not exactly analogous, but like Liz would say, hey, so Shutterstock is just not doing this because like no one's ever thought of this before. And it's like, no, that's probably not it, right? You have to say, why is it actually hard to do this?
Yeah. And then I actually say what I want to do. So I say, I want more money, please. And if you give me the more money, here's our financial projections. And then, of course, those financial projections connect to the data that we have in our financial model in our data room. So another place where you just want to make sure that your financial model and the slide that you have in your deck talking about financials matches. They are 1-for-1.
Yeah, typically what we see at the end of a deck is either use of funds, like what are you going to spend the money on, and or milestones of where you're going to get to with that round. We encourage both. Like we want to know how you want to deploy the capital and where we would get to. So that's on here, and a very exciting chart up and to the right.
Yeah, I mean, up and to the right is what you want it to look like also. But don't make it so that you can't figure it out. Like it's got to be math that makes sense.
We are out of time, so I think this was just sort of a summary slide here of what's next.
This is what's next, products that are next.
And then, conclusion slide.
And this is us.
Well, I think the one thing I want to call out in here is you reinforce sort of the initial messaging with this concept of fast casual content, and you're leading a revolution. So just powerful wording that just shows the level of ambition for the company.
Yeah, and I always describe the photos here as like, I wanted emotionally people to remember our faces, because if they didn't invest, I wanted to be haunting them for the rest of their lives.
Liz does have a list of everyone who said no to her.
I do, yeah.
So, not that there's a chip on your shoulder at all.
I mean, that photo is literally like, I'm watching you. That was the art direction.
There's a little fun in here too. You sign it, love and double taps, Liz and Haley.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, investors and entrepreneurs are building a relationship. They're going to work together. So there's some nice personality here too. I think this is the end of the session. So let's give Liz a round of applause.
Thanks,
and thank
everybody.
her for showing us all this. So what you saw here, this is gold standard stuff for Series A. So, this is the aspiration to get to. Would encourage many of you to stay around. In about 15 minutes, we have an AMA panel with 3 amazing VCs in town. And we have a bunch of content that we'll cover that will help you understand the ecosystem and answer any of your questions. So hopefully you'll hang around. That'll start in about 10, 12 minutes right here. So thank you for being here.
Thanks.